It is February 28th, and this is Pro Wrestling History Radio Daily. I'm your host, the eclectic gentleman, Stephen Watts, and join me as we look at all the pro wrestling birthdays, pro wrestling deaths, title changes, and big moments for this day in pro wrestling history. But before we get started, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get our wrestling nerd on. Starting off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays for February 28th. 1939. The Make-Up Man, the Missing Link from Canada. I will tell you this, his hair, the way it was cut, and the way they put the makeup on him completely gave him a second career and scared me as a kid. I legitimately thought when I was a kid that he was the missing link. 1953. One of the greatest baby faces and one of the greatest in-ring tacticians of all time, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I would say my favorite work of his, I know everybody goes to the Flair trilogy. Some go to the Steve Austin matches. Of course, the Randy Savage feud. But for me, I really, really, truly enjoyed his tag team with Youngblood in the 70s and early 80s. To me, that tag team would have just dominated today's with their athleticism and so forth. And now we're going to move on to 1965. The Big Wiggle, Norman Smiley. Here's another case of people really remember him mostly as that goofy, hardcore character in WCW late 90s when known as Black Magic in Mexico and Japan, and where there's weight classes and so forth. He was such a tactician, such a shooter. It's amazing. And now, of course, he's one of the main trainers and coaches in NXT for the WWE. And last but not least today, 1973, the hardcore Japanese chair swinging freak, Masato Tanaka. That man, the few ECW shows I went, I say few, I probably went to like 20, 25. The chair shots he would swing. I talked to Balls Mahoney, God rest his soul, before he died, and he said nobody swung a chair harder than Masato Tanaka, even more so than himself, any of the Rotten Boys, anybody. So he swung his chair hard and took some hard chair shots as well. Of course, on the flip side of that coin, your pro wrestling deaths for February 28th. The man best known as Virgil, 2024. Now, again, everybody knows him either as Virgil or Vincent. Virgil, of course, in the WWF next to Ted DiBiase, and Vincent, again, next to Ted DiBiase, as a part of the NWO. But I first got to know who he was as Soul Train Jones in the Memphis territory, and his feuds in the mid 80s. He feuded with Chick Donovan, Tommy Rich, Austin Idol. He even challenged, believe it or not, for the AWA World Title with Nick Bockwinkel, and held the AWA Southern Tag Team titles with Rocky Johnson as Soul Train Jones. And I know he's always been a butt of the joke and a meme and so forth. The Virgil sitting at a convention and nobody in his line and so forth. But think about it. He had a 20-something year career. Got to wrestle some of the greatest of all time. He never was the main event, but guess who was always in the background standing next to that main eventer? Whether, again, it's Ted DiBiase or the hottest thing going in the NWO. So, you know what? Virgil won in life, and, screw those people who, looked at him as a meme and just a joke. So rest in peace, Virgil. All right, enough of the sad stuff. It's time to get to the meat and potatoes. That's right. These are your pro wrestling history highlights for February 28th. Sit down and relax and sit a spell, because we're going all the way back to 1913. Gene Paradise defeats Eugene Tremblay to win the World Lightweight title in Montreal, Quebec. We're going to jump 20 years to 1933, where we see Jim Hessley defeat Jack Ross for the Southern Lightweight title in Augusta, Georgia. That next year in 1934, Charlie Fisher defeats Joe Banksy to win the Midwest Wrestling Association World Light Heavyweight title in Columbus, Ohio. This ended Banksy's third reign. We're going to leap over the 40s and go to 1952, where Enrique Torres defeats Bob Orton for the NWA Central States Heavyweight title in Kansas City, Kansas. Moving to 1953, Ray Greenfield defeats Len Holt, easy for me to say, to win the Australian middleweight title in Sydney, Australia. And Phoenix the cat is saying hi to everybody. Hi, Phoenix. 4 years later, in 1957, Dory Funk defeats the Great Bolo in Amarillo, Texas, for both the Amarillo NWA North American Heavyweight title and the Southwest Junior Heavyweight titles. This began Funk's second and ninth reign, respectively. Although I don't know how you can be classified as a heavyweight and then a junior heavyweight, but, it's the 50s. Let's go. 1958. Angelo Savaldi defeats Mike Clancy for the NWA World Junior Heavyweight title in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, ending Clancy's third reign. All right, we're grooving into the 60s. 1961. Dick the Bruiser defeats Bobo Brazil to win the Detroit NWA United States Heavyweight title in Detroit, Michigan, beginning his fifth reign. 2 years later, Bulldog Brower and Johnny Valentine defeat Bruno Sammartino and Whipper Billy Watson to win the Toronto NWA International Tag Team titles in Toronto, Ontario. Of course, Bruno has a long-standing time in Toronto. Of course, that's where he went during his little hiatus with the WWF before he became a big-time champion for them. Moving on to 1966, Patty Barrett and Tom Gohan defeat the Black Terror, Bobby Graham, and John Tolos to win the Vancouver NWA Canadian Tag Team titles in Vancouver, British Columbia. This began Barrett and Gohan's second reign. A lot of stuff going on in Canada today in history. Sticking with that theme, 1968, Archie Goldie defeats Pat O'Connor in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan to become the first Stampede North American heavyweight title. 1968, we're getting out of the cold weather of Canada and going to the warm weather of Honolulu, Hawaii. Curtis Iukea defeats Jim Hattie for the NWA Hawaii heavyweight title in Honolulu, Hawaii, ending Hattie's second reign and beginning Iukea's third. The last year in 1969, Johnny Valentine defeats Dan Miller to win the NWA Texas heavyweight title for a third time in Houston, Texas. Staying in 1969, Dick Murdoch defeats Don Kent for the NWA Central States heavyweight title in St. Joseph, Missouri. Here we go, disco ducking it to the 1970s. 1971, Dutch Savage and Jonathan Boyd. Oh, sorry. Messed that up. I've been so used to the tag teams. Forgive me. 1971, Dutch Savage defeats Jonathan Boyd for the NWA Pacific Northwest heavyweight title, ending Boyd's second reign and beginning Savage's third. Staying in 1971, the Wrestling Pro defeats Bob Kelly in Pensacola, Florida to win the NWA Gulf Coast heavyweight title, ending Kelly's third reign and beginning the Pro's second. That next year in 1972, Tim Woods defeats Bobby Shane to win the held-up Florida NWA heavyweight title. This was a rematch from February 15th. Moving on to 1974, Bob Brown and Lord Alfred Hayes end Jim Brunzell and Mike George's second reign as Central States NWA Tag Team Champions in Kansas City, Kansas. That next year in 1975, and we're making 4 stops in 1975. First, Al Madril defeats El Gran Marcus for the NWA Texas Heavyweight title in Houston, Texas. Texas is ramping up there almost as much as Canada today. Our next stop in 1975 sees Louis Tillett and John Tolos defeat the Hollywood Blondes, Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts, for the NWA America's Tag Team titles in Los Angeles, California, to end the Blondes' second reign. Our third stop in 1975, the Great Mestifo defeats George Galvis in Sydney, Australia, to win the NWA Austro-Asian Heavyweight title. Our fourth and final stop in 1975, Ron Fuller defeats Ron Wright, Double Rons, for the NWA Southeastern Heavyweight title in Knoxville, Tennessee. This began and ended both men's second reigns. Jump into 1976. Roddy Piper and Crusher Verdun defeat Chavo and Gory Guerrero to win the NWA America's Tag Team titles. If you all have not looked at and seen the majority of the Piper Guerrero feud in the 70s, oh my God, it was some of the best work Piper ever did. You think he was crazy in the WWF in the early 80s. His 70s work against the Guerreros would get him canceled nowadays. Let's just leave it at that. Going to 1977, Perro Aguayo defeats Ringo Mendoza for the Mexican National Middleweight title, in Mexico City, Mexico. Learn to read, Stefan. Read your notes, Stefan. 1978, Mike Graham and Steve Kern defeat Jack and Jerry Briscoe to win the Florida NWA United States Tag Team titles in Tampa, Florida, beginning their second reign. All right, moving to the best year ever. That's right, 1981. I was born that year. Los Pastors, Butch Miller and Luke Williams. If anybody can tell me who they are or how they might be known in other companies, comment below. But they defeat Carlos Colon and Invader One for the WWC North American Tag Team titles in Puerto Rico. That next year in 1982, a 10-team tournament was held in Atlanta, Georgia for the NWA World Tag Team titles. The title was vacated in December after Gene Anderson was injured in October, forcing he and Ole Anderson, God bless his soul, who passed away a couple of days ago, to give up the title. The tournament final sees Ole Anderson and Stan Hansen, of all people, wow, that's a tag team, defeat Jack and Jerry Briscoe to win the vacant NWA World Tag Team titles. 1983, Bobby Eaton wins his 12th and final NWA Mid-American Heavyweight title, defeating Sweet Brown Sugar in a loser leaves town match in Memphis, Tennessee. Sweet Brown Sugar would return as the Masked Stagger Lee and is best known to you fans as Coco Beware. Jump into 1986. Dirty Dick Slater defeats Jake Roberts for the Mid-South Television title in Houston, Texas. He was the last to hold the title as Mid-South Wrestling became the Universal Wrestling Federation in March. That next year in 1987, Buddy Landel defeats Ron Fuller to win the NWA Southeast Continental Heavyweight title in Chattanooga, Tennessee, ending Fuller's second reign. All right, it's time to jump into the 90s. Get your Zumbas? Yeah, let's go with Zumbas today. Get your Zumbas and your wild colored windbreakers. 1991, the Glamour Girls, Leilani Kai and Judy Martin, defeat Team America, Heidi Lee Morgan and Misty Blue Sims, in Nevada for the Ladies Professional Wrestling Association Tag Team titles. That next year, 1992, give him a pat on his back. Barry Horowitz defeats Ben Jordan for the Global Wrestling Federation Light Heavyweight title in Dallas, Texas. This began Horowitz's second reign. I used to love coming home from school and watching the GWF shows on ESPN. That was so fun. Wrestling around with my wrestle buddies. You know what I'm talking about. Don't act like y'all didn't have wrestle buddies. 1996, Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. win the vacant CMLL World Tag Team titles in a tournament final in Mexico City, Mexico, defeating Dos Caras and Ultimo Dragon. And last but not least for today, 1996, Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich defeat PG-13, JC Ice and Wolfie D for the USWA Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee. This began Gilbert and Rich's fourth reign and ended PG-13's 11th. And that's it. Those are your pro wrestling history highlights for February 28th. As always, take care of yourself and each other, and we'll see you tomorrow. Good afternoon, and we are on the air. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pro Wrestling History Daily Radio. I'm your host, the eclectic gentleman, Stephen Watts. And man, it's been a long day. I hope you had an amazing day. But sit down, relax, take a few minutes with me, and find out all the pro wrestling birthdays, deaths, title changes, and big moments for this day in pro wrestling history. But before we get started, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get our wrestling nerd on. It is February 22nd, and we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. And actually, we only have really two main pro wrestling birthdays today. 1963, Max Muscle, the enhancement talent to everybody in WCW at one point or another, but still managed to get on a fair amount of pay-per-views in the early to mid 90s before the NWO and all that stuff. And then the other big birthday, if you can call it that, I liked him, 1971, Super Callow, that luchador that had the sunglasses sewn into his ring mask in the Attitude Era, Monday Night War era for WCW. He was super freaking talented and doesn't get the credit he deserves in my view. But those are your primary pro wrestling birthdays. And typically we do the flip side of that coin, but no major deaths for this day in pro wrestling history. So we will take that as a what? We'll take that as a win. So let's keep the positivity going. Let's look at those big moments and those title changes for February 22nd. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will say this. February 22nd is making up for February 21st's lack of title changes and big moments. So let's dive right into it. We're going all the way back in the Wayback Machine to 1937. Bill Collins defeats Ben Jordan for the Georgia Southern Light Heavyweight title in Atlanta, Georgia, ending Jordan's second reign. Now, wrestling fans, especially you younger ones, at this time, definitely many regional titles, weight classes almost, and, you know, for a shoot, 50% of the time. Moving straight on to 1943. Bobby Mangoff earns a disputed win over National Wrestling Association World Heavyweight Champion Billy Longson in Texas to become recognized as champion by promoter Tony Stetcher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Yes, I said National Wrestling Association, not National Wrestling Alliance. All right, moving on to 1952. Ron Etcherson and Sandar Savo defeat Ben and Mike Sharp to win the San Francisco NWA World Tag Team titles in Oakland, California. This ended the Sharps' fourth reign. Moving on 5 years to 1957, Pepper Gomez, God, I love that name, and he had a super cool mustache too, defeats El Medico for the NWA Texas Heavyweight title in Houston, Texas, ending Medico's second reign and beginning Gomez's sixth. A year later, in 1958, Boris and Nikolai Volkov defeat Reggie and Stan Lewinsky to win the Chicago NWA World Tag Team titles in Chicago, Illinois. This began the Volkovs' fifth reign. Moving to the groovy 60s, 1960, Don and Luke Fields win their third Mid-American NWA Southern Tag Team titles by ending the Corazons, Gene and Joe, fourth and final reign in Memphis, Tennessee. 1961, the Mysterious Medics are billed as Gulf Coast NWA Southern Tag Team champions on having trouble speaking today, on arrival to the promotion. So Phantom Lee being given the belts, much like LOD. Oh, LOD. Shame on me for saying their WWF names. The Road Warriors were given, I want to say, this Southeastern tag team titles upon their arrival into the NWA, Jim Crockett's NWA. All right. Now that I butchered that, let's go to 1965. The Worldwide Wrestling Federation held an event in Madison Square Garden in New York City, New York, as they did monthly at that time. But the main event sees Cowboy Bill Watts defeat WWF World Heavyweight Champion Bruno Sammartino. By disqualification, Sammartino retained the title. All right. Screw a Watts. All right. 1966. The Medics defeat Tito Caron and Jose Lothario. Yes, that Jose Lothario that trained Shawn Michaels to win the Southwest NWA North American Tag Team titles in Lubbock, Texas. Moving to 1971, disco ducking. Fritz Von Erich. Could you imagine Fritz Von Erich disco ducking? Fritz Von Erich defeats Turo Tanaka in Fort Worth, Texas to win his ninth NWA American Heavyweight title. 2 years later, in 1973, Killer Carl Krupp, yes, the initials are KKK, things were different back then, and Johnny Valentine defeat Kintaro Onaki and Seiji Sagagachi to win the NWA International Tag Team titles in Osaka, Japan. 1974, Harley Race defeats Archie Goldie for the Stampede North American Heavyweight title in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. This ended Goldie's seventh reign. A year later, in 1975, Dick Dunn, Double D, wins his fourth NWA Alabama Heavyweight title in New Brockton, Alabama, defeating Randy Tyler. 1976, Wildfire Tommy Rich defeats Jerry Lawler in a no DQ match in Memphis, Tennessee to win the Mid-American NWA Southern Heavyweight title, ending Lawler's sixth reign of 5,675. Joke. Actually, probably not. 1977, Mil Mascaras defeats Alfonso Dantes in a hair match in Mexico City, Mexico. I need to look this match up. Alfonso Dantes is fire. Let's just put it that way. All right, 1978, Dean Ho and Moondog Mayne defeat Black Gordman and Goliath in Sacramento, California to win the San Francisco NWA World Tag Team titles. Moving on to 1978, Randy Candy and Steve Littlebear defeat The Brute and Dr. X for the Tri-State NWA United States Tag Team titles in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This is crazy. 1978, Gypsy Joe, who, if you young wrestling fans, he wrestled forever and wrestled up until nearly his death. A lot of you younger fans know him from wrestling New Jack, and it went sideways, and he was probably in his 60s. But Gypsy Joe, who I've wrestled before, God bless his soul, just an amazing. He became hardcore before hardcore. But Gypsy Joe and Buzz Tyler become NWA Mid-American Tag Team Champions when Dutch Mantel gives up his half of the title, which he held with Gypsy Joe. Huh. Okay. Weird booking. 1979, Bobby Sweeten defeats Randy Ailes, aka Randy Rose of Midnight Express fame, to win the NWA Central States heavyweight title in Kansas City, Kansas, beginning his third reign. All right, moving to 1981, which was an amazing year because I was born. 1981, Ivan Koloff and Ray Stevens defeat Paul Jones and the Masked Superstar for the NWA World Tag Team titles in Greensboro, North Carolina. 1983, The Great Gama defeats the Dynamite Kid for the Stampede World Mid-Heavyweight title in Regina, Saskatchewan. This began Gama's second reign and ended Dynamite's third. 1983, Dirty Dick Slater defeats Mike Rotundo, aka IRS, for those WWF fans, to win the NWA television title in Columbia, South Carolina. I was wanting to say Columbus, Ohio. 1984, Jumbo Teruzza defeats Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA World Heavyweight title in Tokyo, Japan. This ended Bockwinkel's fourth and final reign. Bach was in his mid to late 40s at this point, and one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Total package. I would love to see what he would have done in today's wrestling. 1986, the Cuban Assassin, friend of mine, go check out his YouTube, defeats Kendall Windham to win the NWA Florida Heavyweight title in Tampa, Florida. Moving on. Now, this is a match I need to find on tape. Any tape traders, call me. 1988, the Midnight Rockers, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels, defeat the Rock and Roll Express, Robert Gibson and Ricky Morton, in Memphis, Tennessee, to win the held-up AWA World Tag Team titles. 1988, this one's awesome. The first Madison Square Garden event featuring protective mats on the floor around the ring is held in New York City, New York. Sorry for the ding on that team. Interruption, fans. But we'll look at that in a minute. Anyways, this happens because of the Athletic Commission. The New York State Athletic Commission changed presidents or whoever it was, so they demanded that they be protective mats on the floor around the ring. So the first person to take that bump, in the first match, the fabulous Rougeau brothers, Jacques and Raymond, defeat King Harley Race and Iron Mike Sharp, who's subbing for Hercules Hernandez. Iron Mike Sharp takes the bump on the outside on the mats. The main event does see Don Morocco and the Ultimate Warrior defeat King Kong Bundy subbing for the one-man gang. There was travel issues for that show. I'm pretty sure it was snow. Not positive. And Butch Reed with Slick. All right. We're moving into the 90s. 1993. The WWF held a live Monday Night Raw at the Manhattan Center in New York City, New York. The show featured Hulk Hogan's first appearance since WrestleMania 8, announcing a new alliance with Brutus the Barber Beefcake. The new team was called the Mega Maniacs, with Jimmy Hart as their manager. And we all sighed. The main event of that show did see The Undertaker with Paul Bearer defeat Skinner. Moving to 1993, the Moondogs, Splat and Spot, there was like 50 of the Moondogs, defeat the Harris brothers, Don and Ron, for the USWA Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee. This began Splat and Spot's second reign and ended the Harris's third. All right. And this one's going to get me in trouble, but 1997, the East Coast Wrestling Association, ECWA, held its very first Super 8 tournament in Wilmington, Delaware. I went to this show, not that my mom or anybody knew about it. I was supposed to be at a Magic the Gathering tournament in Connecticut. Anyways, you see Ace Darling defeat Cheetah Master in the main event of that tournament, or the finals of that tournament. And then last but not least, actually, you know what? We got a few others. We're going to give you some Mexican history here too. 1998, WCW held its 8th annual Super Brawl pay-per-view event in front of 12,620 paying fans at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, California. The show got a 1.1 buy rate, the highest ever for a Super Brawl at that point. The main event was Sting pinning Hollywood Hulk Hogan after Randy Savage hit Hogan with a can of spray paint to win the vacant WCW World title. This began Sting's 4th reign after the match. Sting spray painted WCW on Hogan, and J.J. Dillon gave Sting the belt. The WCW World Heavyweight title had been held up since January 8th, following the controversial ending of Hogan and Sting's match at December Starrcade, which was the biggest bungle in WCW history. All right, I told you we're going to end on some Lucha Libre history. So, 1998, Perro Aguayo Sr. defeats Cybernetico to win the Mexican National Heavyweight title. 1999 wasn't so good for Perro Aguayo Sr. as El Cabadre and El Cabadre Jr. defeat Perro Aguayo Sr. and Perro Aguayo Jr. for the Mexican National Tag Team titles in Nuevo Laredo, Texas. And ladies and gentlemen, that was a marathon, and my phone still keeps going off like crazy. I got wrestling promoters and other people hitting me up like crazy. So thank you, in all honesty. I ignored them all. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Pro Wrestling History Radio Daily. I hope you've had a wonderful day. I hope you enjoy the show. And ladies and gentlemen, take care of yourselves and each other. And I'll see you tomorrow.